Yeah, it's the great question about the urban future, because it just unpacks a whole can of worms around what are our priorities as a city, as a species, if you like. How do we understand our own humanity with living together? Where do we put our priorities and our values? So it is a really thorny question, because it's not as direct as, okay, so how can I just repurpose that square footage over there and make something else of it? I was having a conversation with someone from the Committee for Sydney the other day, and they very neatly sort of described all the service stations around Sydney. Said, what would you do if you had 3 key sites on every arterial road in every suburb in every part of Australia? What are you going to do with all that space? And that is a fantastic question to ask, one where I can see 1,000 wolves, jumping into that space immediately. And I'd love to think that actually we could just take a little bit of a step back and have a little bit more of a sort of a larger perspective about that and say, all right, well, what's the amenity we can really see coming into our urban contexts that those types of spaces would naturally afford? How do we get there? I don't think our government is going to sort of step into that breach, unfortunately. I don't think that model is going to work. I don't know if private finance is going to be that sort of altruistic about it. So we have to have some other approach to these kinds of contexts. So that's why this technological moment is so fascinating. For me, it's no longer a question of technology. Technology is the solution. What was the question? It's now all about culture. And I think we haven't really made any clear decisions about our own cultural biases or predilections, if you like, that we can sort of bank on now with the systems that would fall in behind them. And that is why this group, why this sort of audience, why the TEDx audience is so interesting, because there's no shortage of ideas out here. The question becomes really, how do we find the best ones and socialise them to the point where we can all get on board with the imagination that is required to sort of bring that new future to light. So without saying what the new future will be, that's the kind of, I think, the sort of the nexus of the problem.
And so the next thing that is likely to come along is going to be software connected to physical things. And it's not going to be the things that you might think of. So it's unlikely to be actual robot machines and stuff like that. We're at the point where the people in this room know that we're starting to build fully instrumented buildings and fully instrumented physical spaces. That's a robot. You've got software driving physical things. That is a robot. And so I'll just encourage people to broaden their minds and think about what a robot might be. They're kind of here already.
I think it's a mistake to think of a building as a thing. I think you have to think of it as a flow of data, and I agree, they're robotic. They are operating just like cybernetic systems. So unless you take that approach, the kinds of holdings that you might have out there, you're really limiting yourself in understanding what it is that you're really in charge of. You're limiting the lifespan, you're limiting the way that you think of its longevity, the way you can extract extra value out of it, the way you can make it better for the users, and so on and so forth. So there is a paradigm change that's required, I think, around that kind of attitude towards the built environment, which I think some systems in the built environment are getting on top of. Yes, advanced BIM systems, PIM systems, and those types of things. But that's only the very thin edge of the wedge. If I could just quote one stat, the Australian construction sector is the second least digitised industry sector out of 22 surveyed by McKinsey earlier this year. They are just above hunting and fishing. So this is TEDx, so I've got to be up about that. So the upside is there's heaps of opportunity, right? We've got so much we can do with this technology in the built environment. It's going to be great. But eventually we'll be taking readings out of the concrete. It'll be telling us what its core temperature is, why that's good or bad for the structural integrity of the place, etc., etc. But we have to understand how we meaningfully operate on that and use it towards a better, bigger purpose. There's already an enormous amount of automation around us. It's not really visible to us in a day-to-day sense because it's in our logistics chains, in our Amazon warehouses and those things. So in that sense, there is already a fairly good chunk of real estate being put over to autonomous systems and life that is non-human acted. That's a really interesting conundrum, which is very contemporary. And I think the other part of that then too becomes, well, how much of that are we able to accept? What will we think is enough space that we will give to the machines, and how much do we need to claim as our own?